In this episode, we're heading back to 1987 as Guns N' Roses delivers a knockout punch to rock and roll with their debut album, Appetite for Destruction. Stay with us.
Get ready for the 3324 podcast, where lifelong friends Dean Legiro and Eric Kuber share their love of all things music and movies. Dean has directed short films and is a music trivia buff. And Eric, trained in audio engineering, brings his extensive knowledge of music and film to the conversation as they discuss, debate, and celebrate their favorite albums, films, and much more.
Welcome, friends, to the 3324 podcast, your final destination. You've hopefully checked out all the other different music and movie podcasts, and you're tired, and there's one more left, and it's us.
Mm-hmm.
And then you don't need to go any further, Eric. Is that a fair assessment?
It's a very fair assessment. Right. This is the final countdown.
What do they say, like in the pizzerias on the pizza box? You've tried the rest, now try the best.
There you go.
Right? That's usually on the box of pizza.
Right.
I think we can steal that motto. You've tried all the other podcasts. The last one is going to be the best one. So join us on social media, won't you? At 3324 podcast. That works on Instagram and Facebook. A lot of good information, a lot of great community there, which is a lot of fun too. Half the fun is me seeing what other community members post and what information they share and what they like. So it's kind of a neat. It's not just us downloading info. It's very much a back and forth. So we've got a special guest with us. I got into the DeLorean. I went back to 1970 something to Springhurst Elementary School.
Oh,
and I plucked my good friend Robert Prisament out and brought him back with me. We've known each other, Rob, since second, third, first, somewhere in there. And when you live in a small town, if you don't move, you go through each grade with you literally spend a lifetime with these people, especially in a town where we came from that was very small. Everybody knew each other, even if you weren't in the same classes. So suffice to say that Rob and I knew each other for pretty much throughout our childhoods. And as a music lover, I tended to gravitate towards those people more so in high school once I got into music. And Rob was one of those people. In addition to Eric came sailing in around 7th grade. He kind of swooped into the scene.
Yeah, moved from Yonkers to Dobbs. Yonkers.
So, Rob, welcome aboard. Welcome to the show. We appreciate this.
Looking forward to it. Thank you.
Pleasure to see you.
It's great having you.
Yep.
And a little story. I don't know if Rob remembers this, but it may sound familiar to Rob. Back in the day, he gave me a Jimi Hendrix cassette tape. He dubbed a copy of "Are You Experienced" for me, and that was my first introduction to Hendrix. And it was because of that. That was.
Did you enjoy it, Dean? Did you like the tape?
I did. I remember when I played it for my brother, and my brother, my brother got mad at me. He's like, "What are you listening to that stuff for? Like, what kind of music is that you're listening to?" I'm like, "Oh,
really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I remember that. He kind of got a little angry, like he didn't. I was like. Because at the time that was a little, not in the lane of what we were listening to, but Rob was always good for the Van Halen. He was good for the Rush. So we were very simpatico in our musical taste. So that was always, like I said, it was in high school. It was good to have a circle of friends that you shared some common interests with, and it made life a little bit more bearable.
Yeah, absolutely. We had some classes together too, Rob and Adam Barish, our good friend Adam Barish. And we would talk again. Yeah, the same thing with me. We would talk music. We'd bring in cassettes and listen to like study hall. We'd have our little cassette play, tape recorder. It wasn't a boom box. It was just a little shitty, tape recorder. And we'd sneak in our cassettes and we'd listen to music. Talk music. Yeah, it was just good times.
And some 40-something years later, we're still talking about music.
We're still talking about and we're still talking about the same music.
So the more things change, the more they stay the same, I guess is the motto. But thank you so much, Rob, for taking some time to talk about this this great album. This is great because it's kind of a twofer. The episode previous to this, if you're listening to them in sequential order, Our previous episode was The Lion and the Cobra from Sinead O'Connor, which was a debut album that came out in 1987. This album, Appetite for Destruction from Guns N' Roses, is their debut album, which also came out in 1987. If you listen to that, go back and listen to that episode, check that out, because this is going to be a very different story. You know, we talk about in our stats, album sales and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
The story of Guns N' Roses is probably a polar opposite of the Sinead O'Connor story. So let's get into it. Let's get the stats going. Let's get that out of the way. And then we'll start digging into this and we'll see what we come up with. So this was released in July of 1987, produced by Mr. Mike Klink. There were 5 singles released from this album. It's So Easy, backed with Mr. Brownstone, which was in the UK only. Welcome to the Jungle, Stateside, hit number 7. Sweet Child of Mine, hit number 1. Paradise City, hit number 5. And the Night Train took the Night Train to the edge of the charts and ended up at number 93. It hit number 1 on Billboard, but that was a year after its release. We'll talk a little bit about that. It wasn't a hit right out of the gate. It wasn't this explosive thing. It went 18 times platinum. That's over 18 million and 30 million worldwide. So it is one of the biggest selling albums of all time, and it might be the biggest selling debut album of all time, I think. Inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2012. That was their first year that they were eligible. So they got right in. They got right in. So Eric, let's why don't you start us off with what's your interaction or connection, or when did you jump on the Night Train with Guns N' Roses?
I can't say that I was a fan from the gate or right out the gate, much like the way the album was perceived. I think it was, when I was going to school in the city for audio engineering, we did a project and we had to pick a song to, make a makeshift video for, and it was Paradise City. And so that the song kind of stuck in my head, and because I had to listen to the song like at least twice that in a session for like a week and a half, and so it really became an earworm. I became intrigued with the rest of the album because at that point everybody was talking about it. It was a monster. It was all over the radio. So I finally listened to it, and it's a formidable rock release. And I was really glad to see back to form, just raunchy rock in the style of like Aerosmith, vintage Aerosmith, or even the Stones, that kind of thing. It was just really a breath of fresh air at that point, because a lot of the rock acts of the period were very sort of glossy and sort of like glam. There was sort of the hair metal bands and that kind of thing. So it was really nice to see something, like real down and dirty again. Yeah. So it was really nice to hear. Yeah.
Cool. So Rob, what about you? What was, now we kind of we have a parallel trajectory, I think, in the late 80s, because we were both working in record stores.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
So, we were actually working for competitors. I used to work for Crazy Eddie, which was now defunct. Probably didn't last much. Probably didn't last very long, actually, into the 90s, if at all. And when did you start? You were working at Tower Records.
I was working at Tower Records for a long time. In '88, I started at Tower, but before that, I was working at Strawberries, which is a chain based in the Northeast. Mostly.
So was that how you got exposed? Was that how you got exposed to GNR, or?
Well, I was working at Strawberries, and Geffen Records wanted to get people to the shows so that it wasn't empty, and also have people hear their new artist. And it was about a month after the album came out, and the Geffen Records representative gave me 2 tickets to see them at the Paradise, which is a small club up in Boston. And I'd never heard a song off the album. I saw a picture of what they looked like, and they looked like they would be pretty good. And back in those days, I was going to 4 shows a week, so it wasn't a big stretch for me to go see a band I hadn't heard of. And I went down to the Paradise and was absolutely blown away by this band I'd never heard before.
Wow. So that was post album release, right? But they, like I said in the beginning, it didn't hit number 1 for a year after it was out. So there was a lot of groundwork to be done. for this band.
Yes,
A
lot of paying their dues and playing small clubs. And I remember them being absolutely great and rough and raunchy. And I only knew 2 songs, which were Knocking on Heaven's Door and Mama Kin by Aerosmith. And the only song I left there humming that I thought was interesting was Sweet Child of Mine, because of the interesting intro on guitar.
Yeah.
And I read later that Slash said he was at a carnival and heard the organ calliope music and went home and tried to recreate a calliope on guitar, and that's what he ended up with.
There you go. And it's one of the it's a classic opening riff. If it's not a classic riff, it's a classic opening to a song. Yeah. As a classic rock ELO loving pop loving person, I went to go work at Crazy Eddie, and at the time it was full of metalheads. So everybody was wearing the black, they were wearing the chains, they had the long hair, everybody was in a band. And then I come in, kind of like pop music and all this other stuff. And all they were talking about and all they ever played was this album, Appetite for Destruction. That's all they were ever talking about. So I can't say that I may have found out about them on my own, sure, because in a year, everybody knew about Guns N' Roses. But they were just playing the shit out of this album. Like it was every time I'd walk in and Crazy Eddie's an electronics retailer, which we can't even compare to anything anymore because there are no electronics retailers. But basically you'd walk in and there'd be the showroom of the TVs, the car stereos, everything, and then you'd walk into the record department. As you're walking through the showroom, they're playing Bon Jovi on the car stereos. They're playing, Wanted Dead or Alive. And then I'm walking in and then I get into the record department and it's Appetite for Destruction. It's totally dirty and grungy. And it's like a dividing. The people in the record department were not the same as the people that worked in the showroom selling VCRs and selling, boom boxes and everything. So I was exposed that way just through almost it being I don't want to say forced in a bad way, being spoon fed, right? This album just kept playing. Yeah. Everyone was they were so excited about it. So, everyone was advocating for it so heavily in a time where hair metal was the thing, right? We were in the throes of Motley Crue and Poison and those type of bands, White Lion and whoever it is. Whitesnake,
Coverdale.
But Guns N' Roses was different. There was something different about them. You said that, we all said the dirty sound, the rock sound. I've always equated them to Aerosmith in form and function, right? In form that they're a five-piece band. Let's go through that right now because we didn't do that. You've got Axl Rose on vocals. You've got Slash on lead guitar. You've got Izzy Stradlin on rhythm guitar, Duff McKagan on bass, and Steven Adler on drums. That's the same type of lineup as Aerosmith. The front man, the virtuoso lead guitarist, the laid back rhythm guitarist, and the rhythm section. So there, the DNA is there for that same type of, and Axl Rose with the scarves and everything. So there's some, you can kind of see that there. And 87 was when Permanent Vacation came out, which was Aerosmith's comeback album with Dude Looks Like a Lady.
Yes.
So there's a lot going on in 87 with this group that no one wanted to hear though. They didn't have.
And they toured with Aerosmith.
Yeah.
I saw them open up for Aerosmith. I'm sure that was a very clean, drug-free backstage area.
Well, I saw them open for Aerosmith as well. We'll get to that in a little bit. We'll talk about some of the shows because you and I think we've seen them quite a bit.
That's interesting that they toured together, if I may interject. Because I would have thought that Aerosmith would have thought of this band as a sort of being threatened by them because they were so much alike. And like Dean says, and just the way that their look and their form. It's interesting to see that they would actually pick them as their opening act. And I would imagine that they probably turned a few heads and people were probably really digging what they were doing. Because it was fresh, it was new. It was,
exactly. That's what you hit it on the head. You have to think of it this way: Aerosmith was in their second coming,
right?
They had in the early 80s, they got rid of Joe Perry. They had Jimmy Crespo, and that didn't work. And then Joe Perry came back for, I think, Done with Mirrors. And then they were dormant, and then they come back. Run DMC brought them back with Walk This Way.
Yeah.
So Aerosmith kind of comes back with this, with Permanent Vacation. They need something to connect to these younger audiences, right? Because they, at that point, even though it's 30-something years ago, they were a relic of the 70s for all intents and purposes, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
By getting a new up-and-coming fresh band, just so happened to emulate them in some way, kind of makes sense. It's kind of a smart thing, right? Because you're getting the younger kids in, and they're getting exposed to this new band, Guns N' Roses. And then they're kind of getting to see the grandfather or the father of Guns N' Roses, Aerosmith, the ones that originally did it. So did
they come out together at any point on the show? That like the members of Guns N' Roses come and play with Aerosmith? No, okay,
no.
Yeah.
But later, like 10 years later, Aerosmith did come out and jam with Guns N' Roses at some shows in Europe.
Interesting.
Yeah. So this album comes out. Not a lot of it kind of comes out and it gets a little bit of push from the record company, but it isn't really doing much. So it's kind of like, okay, Guns N' Roses thinks, okay, this is as far as we're gonna go. They didn't really get a lot. MTV, was kind of reluctant or didn't want to play any videos. So one of the executives finally said, listen to MTV, like, just play our video once, 3 days in a row. Just do that for us. And they did it, and they played it late at night. And the response to Welcome to the Jungle was phenomenal. People were like, oh my God, who is this? What is this? And then it took off. That was the thing is at first it wasn't a whole lot of support or belief behind them. But then once that one song took off, Welcome to the Jungle, boom, then it was on like Donkey Kong, which, again, we talk. I was saying, Motley Crue and Poison, and a lot of those bands are all kind of they talk about partying, right? They talk, the songs "Girls, Girls, Girls" and "Shout at the Devil." It almost seems gimmicky,
Absolutely.
With Guns N' Roses, with Guns N' Roses, I always felt that this was kind of real. Like it was more.
They were dirty and
right.
It wasn't. It wasn't glamour. Girls, Girls, Girls from Motley Crue was like glamorizing strip clubs. Guns N' Roses wasn't glamorizing the stuff they were doing. It was just kind of like a fact of life, Mr. Brown's song about heroin, Yeah.
They were walking the walk.
They were just they were singing about it, but not promoting it. It's kind of like, so I always thought that was something a little bit different, and then just the makeup of the band too. Like I said, they just, the way they were set up with double guitarists, most of these glam and hair bands were with some exceptions were 4-piece, guitar, bass, drums, and a lead singer, and you kind of trot them out there.
A lot of slick production.
A
lot of help.
And the big bombastic production.
Studio,
drums that sound like cannon fire. That was like the big thing. Like those drums that just sound like they're firing cannons into a ship in the Revolutionary War. This was a little bit more downplayed, right? It was a little bit less produced, which gives it that more rock and roll feel and not the slick feel, right? Rob, would you agree with that? That kind of the production also played a part in this a little bit in giving it that authentic feel and not that overblown 80s?
Quite a lot. And what I compare that production or the opposite production to is Def Leppard, with their first 2 albums, they sounded like AC/DC. They were a hard rock band, and I loved them. And then Mutt Lange came in and added keyboards and strings and made them commercial, and they sold 1 billion albums. So I'm not sure whether it's the producer, whether it's Mike Klink, or the band said, we don't want to sound overproduced, but they kept the rough edge. I always wonder what Def Leppard would have sounded like if they stayed a hard rock band.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Because once Pyromania came out, they had a certain sound of the vocals, the backing vocals, everything sounded a certain way, very tight and well produced, which I can appreciate. For Def Leppard, it works. But no one else tried to. Very few, if any, that I can think of tried to replicate that. Like Def Leppard had a sound of their own, and no one kind of really tried to touch it. No one came out with a pour some sugar on me thing, although unless you want to say cherry pie from Warrant, but that was a poor man's attempt at it. But
poor man's stuff.
Exactly. But back to this album, it's not overproduced, but it sounds well recorded, right? So and there's a difference there, right? There's a difference between production and having stuff being recorded in a way that it's everything's sharp. There's separation. You can hear it. It's not murky and it's not muddy. And that's probably one of the refreshing things about the album too, is that it's got this really hard edge sound that comes through really crystal clear. It's not punky where we're going to underproduce it and have it sound grungy just for the sake of. It's like it's dirty, it's edgy, but it sounds nice. It's recorded well, which is important.
How long did we say how long that they had been like up to this point? Where they were probably doing a lot of excessive touring at this point, playing small clubs before the album, right? And continue to do so even after the album was released.
Yeah,
which is odd because typically that's the way a band works, is like they work their asses off just touring the stuff, writing the songs along the way, and then finally they get that big break. Album comes out and boom, it's a hit. And then they start their venues start getting bigger.
A little bit of this case that was a little bit of a story to that is that they worked just on LA on the Strip, got very big there, and got signed to Geffen and started working on this album. But to keep the interest alive, they released an EP called like Suicide EP, which had 4 songs on it, 2 covers, 2 originals, and it was a live EP. And it was on their own label. Now, the interesting thing about that is that the 4 live songs were not live. They were studio demos with applause added in the background from the Texas Jam in '74 to make it sound live.
Interesting, yeah.
And their independent label that they released it on was actually Geffen Records releasing it, but they didn't put the Geffen label anywhere on it so that they could maintain their street cred as putting out something on their own.
They have a little cred.
I was going to say, like, because when you're commenting on how the album sounds, that has that rough edge to it. It's emulating a live, almost like they're playing live in the studio and just recording that. But that's interesting that you pointed that out, is that they actually faked it. They actually faked a live thing.
They faked a live
I find that's funny. That's funny.
Let's put the crowd in afterwards. We'll go get some crowd noise. Let's talk a little bit about Axl Rose, because he is a singular. His voice is something special in this whole hair metal era. The light metal hair band, whatever you want to call it. He's like a 3-tool player. He had 3 really distinct voices that he would sing with, which again separated. You didn't hear other vocalists in these other bands of that era doing different things. With they would sing a ballad, they would sing it slow, like Every Rose has its thorn. Poison, it would be a slow song but sung the same way. Axl Rose has this low, flat, guttural, almost speaking way of singing, like Mr. Brownstone or It's So Easy, right? It's this low, flat voice. Then he's got a middle singing voice, like on Sweet Child of Mine, which can be it's a very good voice. It's a strong voice.
Yeah.
And then on other parts of It's So Easy, he's got this screeching, high pitched voice that he can go to. And you don't know if you've never listened to Appetite for Destruction before, you'll hear Welcome to the Jungle first, and then you hear It's So Easy. You might think, oh, is this a different vocalist? Is like the guitar who's singing now? Because it is that different. Yeah. It doesn't just sound like, oh, Axl's singing lower. His lower timbre, or whatever you want to call it, is something different. It's almost got like it's got a menace to it, And I don't think Rob, I mean, you're probably the expert of this era. I don't think there was other bands that had that kind of a vocalist that would do that.
I can't really think of one offhand. And the cool thing, jumping forward an album, is that mostly on the Use Your Illusions, he did a lot of songs where he was harmonizing with himself, singing the high part and the low part. And if you listen to those songs, you can hear it on the song Locomotive, where you're like, wait, who's he singing with? and you're like, oh wow, he's doing both parts on that.
That's amazing.
So he really was a great vocalist for this album, though. From what I read, he for Appetite, he would sing one line at a time, though, and like they would kind of record a line at a time, probably because of what he was putting his vocal cords through. Just, you know, and again, in some songs you're hearing two distinct different types of vocalizations in there, with the overdubbing and all that kind of stuff. So it's really, again, that's what gave Guns N' Roses their uniqueness as well, right? Is giving you on the album. The album is very consistent, even though the vocals are different song to song. It's a consistent sound, so you can kind of sit down and embrace this, and you know what you're gonna get. No ballads, and I don't think Sweet Child of Mine really qualifies. Do you, Robert, ballad or no? Sweet Child of Mine.
I don't consider it one. They actually kind of consider it a ballad because I read that they were going to put November Rain on Appetite for Destruction, but they didn't want to have two ballads with Sweet Child.
Yeah.
So they put it in the tank for Illusion.
Well, so if you don't consider Sweet Child of Mine a ballad, there's no ballads on this album.
Correct.
Right.
I'll buy that.
It is just one song after another. Not very repetitive. It moves. This album just kind of motors along, carries you from one song to another. You know, It's So Easy, Night Train, Mr. Brownstone. You're going through just really great, strong song after song. Like not a whole lot of filler on this album. I really like when I sit down and listen to it.
There's no song you have to skip.
Yeah, I'm like ready for the next one. It's like what is it? What are you gonna bring next? You know. Because they do it so well. You know, you've got Steven Adler on the drums. For this album, he would appear partially on Use Your Illusion 1 and 2, or was he gone by then? No, Matt Sorum would be on there by then.
Matt Sorum was on that.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about
having some drug problems
the interesting thing about Steven's playing on Appetite for Destruction, and is apparent also in some early videos of them playing in Los Angeles clubs, is that he didn't use a mounted tom. If you listen to the album, all the fill-ins he does, including songs like Mr. Brownstone, which have a ton of drums in them, it's all snare drum and floor tom. Every fill, just if you're a drummer, listen to the album and you'll hear no toms. And that's kind of cool. That's kind of different.
It is cool.
As opposed to like a Neil Peart or something who's...
like 50,000.
Yes, from
the
sea of drums,
half-inch tom to the 2-foot tom.
Yep.
You know, so and Steven Adler, you know, had his share of drug issues. They tried to make some ultimatums. Hey, get yourself cleaned up, or else. He couldn't get it together, so they dismissed him. They got Matt Sorum, who was at that time with the Cult. And that's when the cracks started to show. You know, the one of the, as great as Guns N' Roses was, they imploded just as quickly. You know, Izzy Stradlin, the rhythm guitarist, would say once Steven left, that they lost a little bit of their swing. You know, he felt that Steven was a really good swing pocket style drummer that brought something dynamic to the band. And then once you're already slotting in and out players, it's not good for, you know, the problems that they were having internally. They start to get known. We'll talk a little bit about the shows. For some reason, Axl Rose felt it was a good idea to wait 60 minutes to come on after the opening act, or even sometimes longer than that. Once they got big, once they were the headline, and when you're the opener, you're not pulling that kind of stuff.
You're on time.
You're on time. You're starting. So that'll lead me to my first encounter with Guns N' Roses live was 1988, August of 1988. I was known back then as the extra guy. So if there was always a ticket, if people had concert tickets and someone couldn't go, they would call me, hey, you want to go? And I would go. I saw Journey that way. I saw a lot of groups that way. I saw Styx that way. Yeah. I saw a lot of groups as the extra guy. So it was at Giant Stadium, and it was Deep Purple and Aerosmith was the show. But that show had gotten canceled and was rescheduled for August. So they had added this new group as a triple bill called Guns N' Roses. So we got there early at Giant Stadium, and Guns N' Roses came on. And if you look at the Paradise City video, any of the black and white footage, the color footage was filmed at the Giant Stadium gig where I was, where no one was there yet. So if you look at the video, that's always filmed from them facing the front, not the crowd stuff, because there was barely anybody there. They were just kind of going through their set, doing what they had to do and kind of getting it done. And then Deep Purple came on. And by that time, it had started getting dark at the state. It was like a long day. It was like a long thing. And Deep Purple comes on, and I'm sitting in my seats, and I was like back from the, I was probably like on the opposite side of the stage on the 20-yard line on the other side. So I was really way back. And I look across, and I see someone lit the seats on fire during Smoke on the Water during that concert. And then these seats are like, so it's at night, and all you see is this fire across the other side of the stadium of these seats are on fire, and they're playing like Smoke on the Water. And I was like, okay, all right, I'm here.
That's
and then Aerosmith came
very nice, all the way in the rafters to boot, right?
No, we were down low. We were far back, but we were kind of down low. It wasn't the worst seats, but it was a long day. But Guns N' Roses came on, and no one had really heard of them. This was, August of '88. The album had just hit number one. Yeah, because I think it hit number one the week before. So they were still kind of getting up to speed with stuff, and still that opening band, right? They kind of threw them in on a triple bill with Aerosmith. So Rob, you said you first saw them before that, right? When they were kind of up and coming.
I saw them a few times before that. Yeah, I saw them at the club, as I said. The second time I saw them at a theater in Boston called the Orpheum, which is basically the same as the Beacon in New York. Yeah. Then I saw them open up for Aerosmith, and those were the 3 Appetite for Destruction shows I saw.
Yeah. I ran into them again in June of '91 at Saratoga Springs. So they were a big band then. At that point, they were the guys. I think Skid Row was opening for them, and I actually appear on Use Your Illusion on the album. So. I'm on the song "Get in the Ring," which isn't really much of a song. It's more of a rant. They got you kind of that song's kind of that song doesn't age well. It's not "Use Your Illusion." It's not on "Appetite for Destruction." He was just railing against everybody that hated them, and Circus Magazine and Hit Parade, whoever it was. But anyway, we were at the show, and Axl comes out and he goes, we need you guys to chant for us, chant Guns N' Roses. And they had us chant it for a certain amount of times. I said, okay, stop. And then they said, we need you to chant the words "Get in the Ring." So we chanted the words "Get in the Ring" for however long. They said, stop. Lo and behold, that was the only time they did it. I looked this up. It was the only time they recorded it, and it's on Use Your Illusion. So I'm there. I never got it. Rob, never got a royalty check.
No.
What do you think that's worth?
Is your name inside the album?
Is there a class action lawsuit with me and everybody else that was at Saratoga Springs that day?
I think you could.
I didn't sign a waiver. I didn't sign a waiver.
I think you've got something there.
I think a little too late. They're gonna be like, yeah. So back to Appetite for Destruction. Once they hit number one, I think that's when it really took off, right? Because that's when Sweet Child of Mine. Welcome to the Jungle hit number 7. Sweet Child of Mine hit number 1. Paradise City hit number 5. So there was a stretch where people, they couldn't get enough. Then the album took off. So, again, you're talking 10 million or 18 million. I'm sorry, 18 times platinum for a debut album.
It was just throwing a match onto a pile of gasoline. Just totally exploded like nothing else we'd seen before.
And the best-selling debut of all time. I believe that record still stands, I believe. So they kind of put all these other bands on notice, right? All these other bands in that hair band, era, Wasp or, Striper and Winger and all these other things. Like there was nobody that could touch Guns N' Roses. Like they seemed like they were living that the excesses that they sang about for real, and it wasn't like gimmicky. But it would rear its ugly head, right? Because Axl Rose would start to complain about that, like, "Hey, you guys are just getting out of control with it."
You guys, the other bands, they had to kind of up their game, I think, a little bit, and I don't think they ever did, but yeah, you're right.
I feel bad You got to feel bad for Steven Adler. You know, if you get kicked out of Guns N' Roses for doing too much drugs, that's got to be pretty darn bad.
Yeah.
If they're issuing ultimatums. So, yeah, and I think at one show, Axl was just railing against everybody. Like, you guys are just out of control. You're doing, like, I guess, there's something to be said for self-awareness, but, they were purveyors of that lifestyle, though. Their music was singing about it, speaking about it. So it's kind of like, it makes sense. I don't know if it makes sense that they were having these issues, but, or Izzy Stradlin certainly wasn't, the rhythm guitar certainly wasn't in on that as much. He was becoming disillusioned. Axl, going on stage 90 minutes late, that starts to become a problem. They became their own worst enemies.
What was the reason for that?
Was there ever his attitude, right, Rob? He just
attitude. Was it just attitude?
Because he could. Just because he could.
Yeah.
I saw him at Madison Square Garden. Soundgarden was opening up, and I had never heard of Soundgarden, and so Soundgarden went on. Usually it's like 30 to 45 minutes for breakdown, right? Even nowadays it's even quicker, but back then everyone had their rigs and everything. You'd break that down. So, you give like 45 minutes. It'd be an hour, and then there would be another hour before he would even go on. And people, I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was a control thing where felt he was in control of the audience or whatever, but people would just, by that time, you're kind of pissed off. Like, I'm ready. Are we leaving or what? Like, are we staying? Yeah. Is he coming out? We heard this was going to happen, but it's not fun when you're there.
Yeah. Never had the privilege or I should say that experience of having to sit there, because I probably would have. Yeah. So that I don't know. That sucks. But for a band that, embrace your popularity, but I mean, for God's sake, it's just like night and day. You're coming from playing small clubs to big arenas, and you put. It might have been
rebelling against that. It might have been rebelling against the label, or doing Rob, what do you think? Like to piss to piss off the label, because they certainly don't want to piss off the record buying public, right? Because we're the ones buying the records.
And they don't want to piss off the promoter, or they're not going to be booked for the rest of the tour.
That's true. Yeah.
But they got away with this this was like he still does it, right? He still does it now, I think.
I'm not, I think he quit it when he was in his Buckethead days in the early 2000s and that kind of stuff. But the magic thing about Guns N' Roses live, and especially Axl, is that he was a loose cannon. Mm-hmm. If anybody in the audience looked at him wrong, held out a camera that he didn't want, he would just throw it on his mic, jump out into the crowd, start a fight, turn around and say, "The show is over. I don't like this crowd." If you look at old videos, done. The show's over. If you look at old videos, he's just spinning around like a madman, where you're surprised he doesn't spin right off the stage.
Right.
And that was always something amazing about those shows, is in the same way, if you're sitting on a chair in high school that tilts and almost falls back, but doesn't, and you don't know if it's going to go back or forward, that's how their shows were. Yeah. They could be absolutely, they could fall and wipe out and be a half-hour show and be the worst thing ever, or they could just rip it and be the best band that ever lived. And it was absolutely amazing.
Yeah, and that's that was the danger of going to the show, right? Is you don't know what you were going to get. It wasn't like going to James Taylor. James Taylor's not going to walk off and be like, I don't want to play Carolina on my mind again. Don't ask, that he's going to do what he's going to do. Yeah, he's going to show up,
Of course,
Rob, let me ask you this, Rob, because I always, when I think about, we've on our previous episodes with Eric, we talk a lot about the grunge era, and we talk about the 80s, right? And the gap, where 91, you started to see, Nirvana and Pearl Jam and this and that. And, from in my mind, right, I draw that distinction. Guns N' Roses, I don't link them with the hair bands. Would it be a fair assessment? This is my assessment, that Guns N' Roses was kind of a stopgap, almost a bridge. They were not grunge, but they represented something a little dirtier that grunge would take. Grunge did not take the clean makeup, teased up hair that the hair bands did. And Guns N' Roses was that in the very beginning, but then they kind of evolved into something a little bit more something a little different, right? They tried to evolve with Use Your Illusion.
Yeah.
Do you see where I'm going with that, or totally off base?
Yes. No, what you're saying is that, and I agree, Guns N' Roses is definitely one of them, but there are a couple of bands that were missing links between hair metal and grunge. And another band I consider Jane's Addiction, one of those bands, where they've got the heavy metal roots, but they just weren't, you couldn't call them heavy metal because they just weren't.
You couldn't put them in a box.
Yeah. And although I was never that big into the Chili Peppers, they probably fell into that missing category.
I agree with that. Sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think there was some kind of those transitional bands that they're not grunge.
Bridge the gap.
Yeah, but they were kind of they were kind of like that in betweener, the kind of the space filler, you know, and especially with you know, when Guns N' Roses after post Appetite. A lot of the stuff for their follow-up, Use Your Illusion, was actually written during the Appetite for Destruction era. So like you said, you mentioned November Rain earlier. Mm-hmm. A lot of those songs they had kicking around, so that, but it was a more ambitious thing. Let's not only release a double album, but it's not really going to be a double album. It's going to be 2 single albums, but we'll release them on the same day, you know?
Yeah.
So they really went for something ambitious to really expand their sound, right? They added Dizzy Reed on keyboards. So they were already kind of growing, even though the inner turmoil was eating at them. They were also trying, you know, Axl Rose was asserting more control, which probably was the mistake of probably trying to do that a little too early. I think, you know, someone's got to be the leader, but I think he was probably grabbing too much too soon, you know, and with his erratic behavior, it becomes, okay, it becomes like almost an untenable situation. So Izzy Stradlin would leave not long after Use Your Illusion was released. He's like, he headed for the door. So now you've got the drummer out, you've got a guitarist out, you've got a keyboardist in, you know, now then it starts to not be, at what point does it start to not be Guns N' Roses for you, Rob?
Yeah. And then on the Use Your Illusion tour had different aspects to it. Most of the way into the tour, they started to have a whole horn section of like 5 different very hot young women playing the horns. Then after they did that, they did a Skin and Bone legs of the tour, which was just the 5 of them again.
Yeah.
And they would even bring a couch out for an acoustic set in the middle. So they tried all different incarnations to see, you know, which seemed to work the best or feel the most comfortable.
Yeah, which you have to applaud that they weren't just going out and trotting out the same set list, you know, which bands do, or at the time that was pretty popular. Right. It's like, okay, here's our set list, here's what we're doing, and we're gonna go from town to town and do it. So by them doing that, you gotta kind of appreciate it. We talked about November Rain from Use Your Illusion. We'll get back to Appetite, but there is a there it is. There's a good bell. We've got a Jeff Lynne connection for November Rain. Originally, and if you listen to that song, it's an epic song. It's like 7 or 8 minutes. It's probably one of their biggest produced songs from Use Your Illusion. It's got strings and everything. How does Jeff Lynne come in? Well, originally Axl Rose wanted Jeff Lynne to produce that song for them. I don't think I can imagine that. I think my head might explode. I don't know if that was, you know, they need to treat him with, you know, the right way.
What he was thinking about was ELO in the 70s at that point. So
yeah, he was definitely influenced,
but he wasn't doing that anymore.
No.
You know, at this point he was a producer, but he has a very, you know, stripped down production sense and style, and it's very
at time,
close to the chest. And you know, so Jeff, I'm sure, probably was like, no, we're just, he wasn't into the lush production.
I don't think he had I didn't think he had the time. I think that's what it was. In 91, he was getting pulled 6 ways from Sunday. So it might have been interesting to see. Yeah. It would have been interesting to see, but he might have been like, I just can't. This is too much, you know? or maybe he said, you know, my friend George Harrison said, no, I can't do it.
Yeah, so, there you go.
But let's get back to Appetite. Rob, what songs stick out for you besides the hits? I mean, the hits are the hits. And they're undeniable, right? Welcome to the Jungle, Paradise City, Sweet Child of Mine. Those are like 3, but there's a lot of other minor hits as well. What are some of the minor songs that really kind of do it for you?
for me, those three are the top tier.
Yep.
The second tier for me, very close behind that, Mr. Brownstone, I think is one of the best songs
I'll give you
they
that one.
wrote in that area. They're always opening the shows these days with It's So Easy. So that's definitely up there. Night Train is definitely up there. And gotta love the lyrics. I've got a Molotov cocktail with a match to go. I smoke my cigarette with style.
Yep. That's it.
Yeah.
Eric, what about you? What do you have?
I like my Michelle. I do like Paradise City is my favorite. That's a hit. But Mr. Brownstone, I love. Night Train. Yeah. So those are the big ones for me. But I don't know. I mean, it's just, again, a very well put together album, and consider the length of this album too, almost 54 minutes. That was pretty, not the norm.
No,
it's 12 songs, so
stretching the limits of LP of an album too.
LPs typically they're like 9 songs, maybe 10 at that point, but
of what could fit as far as time. You were
that's right.
For LPs, you were constricted by actual space,
right,
of what you could get in, and I was surprised that this was out on LP. I'm like, how did this get out on LP? Because usually like 45 minutes is a topper.
Yeah.
For an album to fit, without degrading. That's the thing, is you can get more stuff on an album, but then the space between the grooves gets thinner.
That's right.
And so you lose a little fidelity.
And that's when it becomes a double album, because you have to put, you got to put them on all 4 sides. But I mean, LPs were kind of on their way out at this point, I guess. But the release was still there. I mean, it was still and sounded great. Yeah. So
I'm gonna go with Rocket Queen. I really like Rocket Queen. It closes the album out. It's kind of a different song. It's got kind of a different section towards the end. It kind of changes, so you're kind of getting a prototypical Guns N' Roses song in the beginning, and then it kind of changes up at the end. And I really kind of like. Again, I like that they're not afraid to try different things. So this is a very fast album. The songs are up tempo. They move. Axl Rose growls, screams, shrieks, and baritones his way through this album, which is one of the things that makes it so dynamic as well, right? It's not just I sing here and that's my vocal range and that's all I do. You're getting someone that really kind of is guttural sometimes, shrieking sometimes, but then very tender, like Sweet Child of Mine. He sings it straight up pretty much, and he really delivers it. He's got a strong voice. That's the thing. You think, Axl Rose is a pain in the ass. He does all this crazy stuff, but he's actually a really good vocalist. He can sing. He's got a really clear, strong voice when he wants to sing those types of songs, right? As well, they can't take that away from him.
I think that's the thing. It's like he knew it. That's why he got away with half the shit that he got away with, because he knew that he was unique in that sense. So, how many singers were there like that at that point?
Yeah.
Very easy, not easy to replace.
You mentioned Rocket Queen and trying new things in the studio. There's something interesting on that song. During the breakdown near the end, Axl felt like he wanted something more in the breakdown, and he called up Steve Nadler's girlfriend to come down to the studio and played that middle section for her and said, "We're going to go into the recording booth and have sex, and you be as loud as possible."
There you go.
And that story is not refuted by anybody. She said, "That's me on the recording."
That's her.
Axel's like, "That's her on the recording." So
that's different than a fake crowd noise. That's not quite the fake crowd noise from their EP. Now, Rob, did you know? I just found this out recently. Did you know that Axl Rose re-recorded this album in 1999?
I never heard.
He got whoever the group was at the time, whoever was in the group at the time. Who was it? Robin Thicke, Tommy Stinson, Paul Tobias, Josh Freese, Dizzy Reed, and Chris Pittman. He wanted to re-record it because in the 90s you had new recording techniques. They re-recorded the album. It was never released.
Huh.
Interesting.
Is that something you'd want to hear? Would that be a weird curiosity, or would that be cringe? Like, nah, because that was Axl with the braids at that point, right?
Yeah. And it's interesting because I knew Tommy, And he used to say that they had a beeper. The band had to wear a beeper all the time, and that Axl would page them at 3 a.m. because he had an idea, and they had to come over to his studio and play around with it. That they had no time to themselves, but they were paid very nicely, so it was
you're on call. But that's like being a paid employee, though. That's not like being a band member, right? That's kind of like
100%
a hired hand, you know. And that's what happened after they exploded. You know, after Use Your Illusion, the group imploded into 1,000 pieces. You know, their next album was supposed to be called Chinese Democracy. It was going to be like their epic thing, and it became one of the greatest lost albums. It became like the Beach Boys' Smile. Like Chinese Democracy was supposed to be this album that Axl was working on for years and years.
I remember that. It was like a long anticipated,
they would announce it. Coming in 97, coming in 99, coming in 03. And then it finally came out in whenever, like 2009 or whatever it was. And everyone's like, oh, okay. Like the bloom was off the rose at that point. Like there was no, little inside joke off the rose, the Axl Rose. Guns N' Roses came and went, and they weren't even a band at that point. They weren't even a cohesive band concern. It was the Axl Rose project more than anything at that point. Because they were all there's a lot of animosity there. Slash is like, I'm done. I don't need this anymore. And he went on his own thing, Slash's Snake Pit and a couple other projects, hired Gunn on some other projects and did things. And Velvet Revolver, right? That was Slash and Duff.
Sure.
Yeah. With the late Scott Weiland, so they moved on, but Axl just still stayed like he kind of like went underground, like he's still working on this Chinese Democracy album. That's all that was ever talked about. It's like I'm still working on it. And you'd hear a snippet of a song or a rumor of a release date, and it would never come. It would come and go. And then it finally came out, and everyone's like, yeah, okay.
See, that's the point where if you're that involved with the music and you're that, you can't alienate your fans at the same time, because there's nobody going to be listening to this when it's done, when it's all said and done. And that's exactly what happened. It's like nobody cared.
Yeah, because there was nothing in between.
Right. And it's, and
right. There was like a 20-year gap of nothing.
Right. Exactly. So it's just, at that point, people just, there are other bands we could be listening to,
and music.
I'd rather listen to Velvet Revolver, because Slash he's a fantastic musician. And that's what people, when you get older, that's what you appreciate. It's not so much the acrobatics and the show that you start to appreciate what they're actually doing, and what they're creating. And, at least that's just my opinion anyway. But, so who cares that, he's keeping people waiting for 2 hours or whatever it is over a show. No, I want to hear music, and I'm going to hold, and, I'll go listen to another band. I'll go see another band at this point, and just, and know that I'm going to get what I want, out of that band, and bands who appreciate their audience. And it's just people who are so flippant like that about their audience is just, I don't get it. I mean, Dean and I experienced Dylan a couple of years back, and he, did the exact same thing. And it's just, we had to see him because, Dean got tickets. He, invited me to go, and we went. And I'm glad to say that I got to see Bob Dylan once in my life, but it was one of those shows that he was doing standards at that point, and he was literally mocking these standards. Like he was doing them in such a way that it was he was almost like making fun of it, and just pissing the audience was just so aggravated, so pissed off. And these are supposedly diehard Dylan fans who came to the show before he came on talking about Dylan and how many times they saw him, and you come to expect it to Dylan, but even they were annoyed by it.
They were pretty incensed. So it just goes to show, it's kind of like, it's people are only going to hang around for a certain amount of time.
That's right.
I have a Velvet Revolver conspiracy theory.
Let's hear it.
Tell me if this is in my own head. I've never looked it up on the internet to see if it's true or not. But their name, Velvet Revolver. Scott Weiland was in a band called Stone, and they went with Velvet. Okay. Guns N' Roses, Revolver. Stone. You think? Am I just imagining that, or did they play off those two bands?
It could be.
It most certainly could be a nod to both. I think.
Or it could be. I would think maybe a nod to Velvet Underground and Revolver by the Beatles.
Ooh, there you go.
Nice.
I think
there you go.
Now, if you want to, since you brought it up, Rob. You brought up. Well, actually, I brought up Velvet Revolver. I'm sorry. I'll take the hit for it. Velvet Revolver did a cover of "Can't Get It Out of My Head" by the Electric Light Orchestra.
Well, there you go.
There's another ELO, 2 ELO references for the price of 1. Let's talk about as we wrap up, let's talk about the Hall of Fame. So they get inducted. This is the sad tale that we've told on many episodes of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and the continuing animosity that was going on. So at that point, all things weren't well in Guns N' Roses land like they are now. Now Guns N' Roses tours. Slash is on stage. Duff is on stage. I don't think Matt saw him. I think they got somebody else. But the 3 original members, minus Izzy Stradlin, are touring, and everybody loves it, and it's a great time. But back in 2011, 2012, things were not so happy. So they get inducted. Everybody shows up but Axl, because he's got to pull that nonsense. He's got to be Axl. And again, I hate when bands do that. Yeah. It's and you could think what you want. You could hate the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but he thanked the fans. He goes, this is for you, all the fans. If it's for the fans, then swallow your pride and go and perform. Do 2 songs, walk off, and don't talk to each other ever again if you need to.
Right.
Sign a contract. We'll be in separate rooms. We'll sound check for 10 minutes. Whatever it is, do whatever you got to do, but then do that. Right?
Yeah,
if you're saying it's for the fans, this will, you guys got us in, then honor that.
I totally agree. Yeah.
It
really it's a shame.
Outside of them trying to murder each other, where you fear for your life, if you're fighting, great, you're fighting. Just you don't have to talk to each other. Do the sound check. You guys know the songs already. Roll through a couple and then go your separate ways. And put on a show.
I often think that that's almost part of the lifestyle, part of the mystique of rock and roll to begin with, is that you have to hate each other. Isn't that the tradition, right?
You can't be like REM and you too. You can't all like each other. They all like each other.
And they all get along. Rush did it for, they were the most consistently, and they never bickered. They never, they didn't party a lot either, but they carried through and all the way to the end. It can be done. It
can be nice. You can collaborate.
But it seems like that's the stigma, right? It's like, no, we're in a band. Even Almost Famous did it. Like Cameron Crowe almost even parodied it in his own film with the band. They're not getting along, and Billy Crudup and Jason Lee. Like fighting, and that seems to be the almost part of the criteria for being in a rock and roll band is to not.
We could name Eagles, Journey, Styx, Blondie.
Mac,
so much acrimony in these bands,
right.
And it's just kind of like, all right,
I've got one last GNR story.
Go ahead, go for it. Okay.
So before the Use Your Illusion albums came out, about a month or 2 before, Guns N' Roses did a secret club tour of 3 clubs in San Francisco, Los Angeles, and New York. I knew about the New York show. I called up everybody I knew in the music business. Everybody was going. Nobody had an extra ticket for me.
Oh.
So my friend and I take our wallets, go down there, and it's like, we're going to get into this show. We finally find somebody that had extra tickets. We paid an exorbitant amount. We swore to each other that until the day we died, we would never tell anybody how much we paid to get into the Ritz show of Guns N' Roses. So
that's a great story, Rob. How much did you pay?
Are you going to reveal that or no?
we each paid $100 to get in.
But back then the tickets were probably like 15. Yeah, they were probably like $15 the tickets back then.
It says $20 on it. Yeah. It says $20 on the ticket.
$20.
So
there you go. Back then it was like, oh, that's highway robbery. That's like the going rate for like a balcony seat nowadays, or even more.
Right.
It's
not even.
We paid 5 times face value.
That was probably. I was like, yeah, man, I just made $100. Now it's like 100. I pay that for I'd pay that for the nosebleeds, easily pay that for the nosebleeds.
Pay that for a T-shirt nowadays. Seriously.
So Rob, I'm going to call you to the carpet as we close out.
Go for it.
When Use Your Illusion 1 and 2 came out, you were working at Tower Records in Yonkers, New York.
In Yonkers, New York.
And I was a patron of that store. I shopped there quite often. I was buy CDs.
Thank you.
You guys also had the video rental side, so I'd go rent Faces of Death or whatever creepy stuff was available. I'd go rent there. And then you guys had when Use Your Illusion 1 or 2 came out, you guys had a midnight opening, so you're going to sell it at midnight. And you guys promised food, and I waited
lined
online.
up, so we bought them pizza.
Yes, you're right. You are absolutely right. You did buy pizza, but what you're not telling everybody is that the guy came with the pizzas and threw them on the ground as he was walking by, like he's dealing out a deck of cards, and then everyone's like scrambling like maniacs to flip the box open and grab a slice and then get your space back online. So so all these years later, I'm thanking you for the pizza. So now we're even for the Hendrix cassette.
There you go.
That works.
Eric, you were with me. You were with me, right?
I did. It was a midnight thing, and our friend John was also with us. And you guys,
we were waiting. Get the two CDs and
the two CDs, right? And I remember distinctly that both those CDs were very, very different. By the way, we didn't really comment on this, but both albums were distinctively different. That's probably the reason why they didn't decide to make it a double album. Is because the music was just so night and day.
I'm a huge fan. To this day, I don't know which songs are on which album.
Yeah, I get confused. So I'm like, wait, where's Don't Cry? Which version? And then it's like
which version?
It's like I can't keep track of it. So I think that's gonna do it. Appetite for Destruction, a watershed moment in rock and roll. An instant classic, right? I mean, I think that's easy to say, Rob, that when this came out, like Sweet Child of Mine was an instant anthem from the opening lick.
Mm-hmm.
It was a game changer.
Yeah, it absolutely was. Again, in a decade awash with excess and excessive hairspray and excessive makeup. These guys kind of came in and just kind of really brought rock and roll back down to the grain, really sanded away a lot of that varnish. And for a brief moment, they flew high, but they, imploded. But for that brief moment, they really kind of showed what rock and roll could, what it was and what it could be again. But looming on the horizon was grunge anyway. So, things were going to change, things were going to change no matter what. But Guns N' Roses they hit at the perfect time. With the right kind of music, and this album is immortal. It should be in everybody's collection. Whether if you're not a big metal or rock fan, have this one in as the obligatory. Then right,
I totally agree.
For credit, if you want to have the credit in your rock and roll collection or your music collection, have Appetite for Destruction. When people flip through, Guns N' Roses, huh? Oh, all right. You'll get that look of acknowledgement. So that's going to do it for this episode of the 3324 podcast. Robert Prisament. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you.
A pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll definitely want to have you back on again. We'll get maybe we'll do if we do another Rush album, perhaps, or if we do the Scorpions, we'll dig up Rob Majorano and he can help us out.
Okay. Oh goodness.
Sure.
That's right.
If he's listening, Rob, how are you? But anyway, that'll do it. Find us on social media, won't you? At 3324 Podcast. That's on Instagram or Facebook. We've got video versions of this too, so you can go to YouTube and you can kind of see all three of our mugs and see what we look like. See what three classmates from way back when look like now, aged. And then we also do live shows every other week on YouTube and Facebook as well. So join us there. So for Robert, thank you very much. For Eric, this has been Dean asking you to please flip the record over and listen to side B. It's just as good as side A.
You've been listening to the 3324 podcast with Dean Legiro and Eric Kuber. You can find us on your favorite podcast provider, so please like, subscribe, and rate to become a part of the 3324 family. Your feedback is important, so make sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at 3324 podcast and on Twitter at 3324p to join the conversation.